아브라함 비란도 올브라이트 교수의 제자였죠.
그분은 아주 엄격한 현장 감독 스타일이었죠. 훌륭한 선생님이었고 천재였죠. 우리들에겐 하나의 벽이었습니다. 도저히 넘어설 수 없을 것 같은.
올브라이트 교수는 상당한 학문적 업적을 쌓았습니다. 하지만 에드워드 로빈슨과 마찬가지로 기독교적인 시각을 갖고 있었죠. 그는 성서의 사실성에 대해 의문을 제기하는 학계의 새로운 조류에 반대했습니다.
올브라이트 교수는 원래 19세기의 성서 비평 이론의 입장에서 학문을 시작했습니다. 하지만 고고학적인 연구를 시작하면서 자신이 발견하고 있는 성과들이 성서의 사실성을 긍정하는 쪽으로 나가고 있다는 사실을 깨닫게 됐죠. 그래서 그는 성서의 사실성에 대한 비판적인 입장을 버리고 점점 더 긍정적인 방향으로 나갔습니다.
성서 고고학의 창시자들은 중동 지역에 흩어져 있는 고대 문명의 유적들을 하나둘 발굴하고 연구하는 과정에서 성서에 대한 비판론을 부정하고 성서의 내용에 대한 역사적 근거를 찾으려는 입장을 취했습니다.
결정적 증거를 찾기 위해 올브라이트 교수는 가장 인상적인 유적이 묻혀있는 곳을 찾아다녔습니다. 그는 드디어 구약 성서 여호수아의 유적을 찾아냅니다.
여호와께서 여호수아에게 말씀하셨다. 나의 종 모세가 죽었으니 너는 이제 백성을 거느리고 떠나 이 요르단 강을 건너 내가 너에게 약속한 땅으로 들어가거라. 모세에게 약속한 대로 너희 발에 닿는 모든 땅을 너희에게 주리라.
구약 성서에 따르면 이집트에서 탈출한 히브리인들은 천신만고 끝에 하나님께서 그들의 선조 아브라함에게 약속했던 땅에 도착했습니다. 하지만 그곳을 얻기 위해서는 우상 숭배를 하던 가나안인들을 정복해야 했습니다. 여호수아는 이스라엘 백성들을 이끌고 수많은 가나안 도시들을 정복했습니다. 그 중에서도 여리고성의 함락은 아주 대단한 사건이었죠. (1926년) 올브라이트 교수는 여호수아가 함락시킨 성이 있다는 것을 탐사하기 시작했습니다. 텔베텔 지역의 유적층을 조심스럽게 파내려간 결과 성서의 내용과 일치하는 것으로 보이는 폐허가 나타났습니다. 조사를 계속한 결과 기부아라는 고대 언덕과 비슷한 지층을 발견했죠. 그는 확신을 얻었습니다.
첫 번째 유적층은 구약의 판관계에서 묘사된 대로 불에 탄 흔적이 있었다.
다른 성서 고고학자들도 이와 비슷한 폐허의 유적을 발견했습니다. 그 중에는 여리고성의 무너진 성벽도 있었죠.
존 가스탱은 옛날 여리고성이 있던 테렐 술탄 지역을 탐사했습니다. 1930년대에 발굴 작업을 했죠. 그리고 성서의 이야기가 사실이라고 믿게 됐습니다. 심하게 파괴된 고대 도시의 유적을 발견했어요. 무너진 성벽과 진흙 벽돌 조각 등이 발견됐고 불에 탄 흔적이 남아 있었습니다. 기원전 1400년경의 것으로 추정됐죠. 그 뒤로 약 20년 동안 이것은 여호수아의 정복을 증명하는 걸로 여겨졌습니다.
1940년에 올브라이트 교수는 고대 이스라엘의 연대기를 재구성하기에 이르렀습니다. 구약 성서와 고고학적인 유적을 토대로 하여 이와 같은 결론을 내렸죠.
이 조사를 통해 신학적으로도 상당한 성과가 있었다. 발견을 거듭할수록 수많은 사실이 정확하게 밝혀졌다. 구약 성서를 역사적인 기록으로 인정할 수 있는 토대가 점점 늘어난 것이다.
올브라이트 교수님이 남긴 가장 큰 업적이라고 하면은 성서에 대한 새로운 시각을 갖게 해준 점과 함께 고고학적인 연구를 뒷받침한 점입니다. 신학과 고고학 사이에 다리를 놨다고 할 수 있습니다.
하지만 중동에는
우리는 여리고성이 지진에 의해 무너진 것이라는 과학적 증거가 많이 있습니다. 바로 성경에 쓰여진 것처럼 말입니다. 가장 확실한 증거는 기원전 1400년경 발견된 무너진 담에 의해 사망한 것이 명백한 사람들의 해골입니다.
수년간 학자들은 여리고성 얘기를 신화적인 전설로만 여겼습니다. 그러나 고고학적인 증거가 성경과 놀랍도록 일치한다는 사실을 알 수 있습니다. 여리고는 잘 요새화된 도시였습니다. 2개의 진흙담이 감싸고 있었죠. 고고학적인 증거를 보면 이 담이 성경에 쓰인 것과 같이 무너져 내렸는데 아마도 지진에 의한 것으로 보여집니다. 성의 잔재는 아직도 그곳에 남아 있습니다. 이것이 바로 그것으로 약 3,400년 된 것입니다. 고고학자들이 도시를 발굴했을 당시 도시가 멸망될 때 지진 활동이 있었다는 증거를 많이 찾을 수 있었습니다. 성 안에는 많은 양의 곡식이 있었는데 이는 멸망한 때가 추수 직후라는 것을 말해줍니다. 이것도 역시 성경 구절과 일치합니다. 고대 도시에서 많은 양의 곡식을 찾기는 매우 드문 일인데 여리고성에서는 거의 모든 건물에서 곡식이 가득한 항아리를 찾을 수 있었습니다. 귀한 것이기 때문에 보통 약탈되기 마련인데 성경에 보면 이스라엘 백성에게 약탈을 하지 말라 금하였고 하나님께 제물로 바치라 하였다고 쓰여 있습니다. 많은 양의 곡식이 남아있었다는 것은 포위 기간이 매우 짧았다는 얘기가 됩니다. 성경에는 7일간 포위를 했다고 되어 있습니다. 고고학자들이 찾은 모든 증거가 성경의 내용과 정확히 일치합니다.
These things differently. If people are telling us that there was no Jericho at the time that Joshua conquered the promised land, and therefore Joshua is a piece of fiction, and therefore the conquest is a piece of fiction, and then probably Exodus is a piece of fiction as well. If that's the case, why don't we ask the simple question, well, when was Jericho around? When was Jericho destroyed? And start from that point of view.
The conquest began with the Israelites crossing the Jordan River. Joshua sent men to spy out the massively walled city of Jericho, and there they met a harlot named Rahab, who reported that all in the land had heard what God had done for the Israelites, and they were terrified. Rahab hid the spies and aided their escape to the mountains.
What evidence do you see matching the conquest of Jericho?
First of all, we're told that Jericho was fortified. When the archaeologists dug the city, particularly Kathleen Kenyon, when she did her work in the 50s, discovered that the tell that the city's built on was surrounded by a great earthen rampart.
Excavators found that Jericho was protected by a brilliant defensive system. At its base was a stone retaining wall more than 15 feet high, with a defensive extension wall of mud bricks rising higher still. Beyond this was the rampart, a steep slope covered with a slick surface of white plaster, where attackers would have been exposed to arrows and slingstones from above. At the top of this rampart was the main city wall, also made of mud brick, this one more than 25 feet high and 10 feet thick.
Imagine the dread and the desperate panic of the people of Jericho. Day after day for 6 days, the people of Israel are walking around their city with the Ark of the Covenant and the sounding of ram's horns. Then on the 7th day, they encircle the city 7 times, and the priests give a long blast on their horns. The people let loose with a mighty shout. The walls come tumbling down, allowing the Israelites to climb up into the city, taking it and commencing the conquering of the land of Israel.
Well, when the city met its end, these mud brick walls collapsed, and they actually fell down to the base of the stone retaining wall. Kenyon describes it very clearly and in detail in her excavation report, and then we're told they set the city on fire. And that's exactly what we find. Jericho was massively destroyed by fire. Kenyon said it was very clear that within the city, the walls of the buildings had fallen as well. And she says that the walls fell before the fire. And so we have the sequence that we read in the Bible. First, the fallen walls, and then the city being set on fire by the Israelites.
Excavations at the site uncovered clear evidence for a massive destruction by fire with a very thick burn layer of extremely high temperatures. This caused Kenyon to attribute the burning to an enemy attack and not fires that would result solely from an earthquake.
She claimed that the city was destroyed around 1550 BC by the Egyptians. Well, there's absolutely no evidence that the Egyptians were ever in the Jordan Valley at this time period.
So because Kenyon dated the destruction of Jericho 150 years before the Israelites were supposed to be there, she made no connection between the destruction and the biblical account. But once again, this date fits the earlier pattern I've been seeing.
Within the city, a very unique discovery was made. Both Garstang and Kenyon found in the houses that they excavated many jars full of grain that were stored there.
The store jars in the city were pretty full. That suggests the harvest had only recently been gathered in, and the details in the biblical account point to an event that happened sometime in the spring. And down there in the Jordan Valley, spring is when the harvest is gathered in, the grain harvest.
When the Israelites crossed the Jordan, the first thing they did was celebrate Passover. Well, when is Passover? Again, the spring of the year.
The full jars also indicate that if this was a siege, it was very short, unusual for a strong fortified city such as Jericho.
And that matches the biblical account because the siege was only 7 days. Otherwise, the people inside would have consumed a lot of that grain if it dragged out for months.
Was the grain found all over the city?
Yes. In every house that was excavated, they found jars of grain.
There's one other intriguing detail at Jericho that fits the Bible remarkably well. It had to do with a promise made to Rahab.
She actually lived in the city wall, and after hiding the spies, they promised her that she and her family would be protected when they attacked the city. And they kept their promise. She had marked her home with a scarlet cord, which she hung out the window.
But if her house was built into the city wall, how could it have survived?
I came across the actual archaeological report that the German excavator of Jericho, Ernst Sellen, had published in 1913. He was the first to conduct a major excavation of the site, and I could see that his work was impressive, but now seemed to have been forgotten. Here were detailed plans and photographs, including one part of the site, which echoed the Rahab story in an unexpected way.
The Germans found that in this one short stretch on the north side of the city, there were houses built on the rampart between the lower city wall and the upper city wall, and some of those houses were built right up against the lower city wall. They found that the city wall did not fall in this area. So that provides an explanation for how the spies could have saved Rahab and her family, because God brought the wall down everywhere else except where her house was, and we have archaeological evidence to back that up.
Well, what if people say, well, you're biased?
I think everybody in the field is biased, one way or another. I admit my bias. However, I cannot make up the evidence. I cannot plant it in the ground. I have analyzed it and compared it to the Bible, and I see, wow, it matches exactly. That's science. Look at your evidence and come to a conclusion based on the evidence.
Archaeologists have uncovered a city with high fortification walls that fell down. Evidence that the city was intentionally burned after the collapse. Storage jars filled with charred grain, evidence of a short siege in springtime. And a section of houses within the wall, miraculously preserved, just as in the biblical account. According to the biblical account, Joshua spoke a curse against anyone who would rebuild the city of Jericho. And the archaeology shows that after the destruction, the city of Jericho was indeed abandoned for centuries. But of course, this all happens in the wrong time in the view of most scholars. Bryant Wood believes that Kenyon misdated the pottery at Jericho, resulting in a wrong destruction date. He, along with Charles Ayling, believed that the conquest occurred around 1400 BC using the conventional dates for Egypt and Canaan. However, David Roll and John Bimson have a different idea. They propose that Kenyon came to a wrong destruction date at Jericho because the dates assigned to the Middle Bronze Age are not correct, and these dates for history need a major adjustment. Regardless, all these scholars agree that Jericho was destroyed in a manner that matches the story of Joshua and the Israelites. But there's more to the conquest than just Jericho. Spies had reported that Canaan was a beautiful land, flowing with milk and honey. But it was also filled with great fortified cities that had walls reaching up to heaven. One by one, they would fall to Joshua.
Then Joshua turned north and headed for the city of Hazor. Jabin, king of Hazor, gathered all the kings of the region against Israel. Joshua captured Hazor and struck its king with the sword, and Joshua destroyed Hazor by fire.
Israeli archaeologists at Hazor found a massive burn layer from the same time as Jericho's destruction. They also found something else.
We found tablets in the Middle Bronze Age palace belonging to a king called Jabin, and that's the name of the king that Joshua actually stuck his sword into in the story.
This is the cuneiform tablet containing the name of Jabin, found in remains of the palace in ancient Hazor.
So you have a connection between the Bible story and these tablets.
We have a name that's identical. We have a tablet coming out of the ground with the name Jabin on it. And in the story of Joshua, Joshua killed King Jabin of Hazor. Wow.
But when looking for the conquest in the expected time period, archaeologists have found no evidence. In fact, many of these sites were not even occupied throughout the entire Late Bronze Age. No high walls, no massive destructions, only a series of burnt out and empty ruins. This has been a key factor in the current skepticism over the biblical account of the conquest.
Again, maybe they've been looking in the wrong time for evidence of the Israelites entering Canaan. Because when you look earlier in the Middle Bronze Age, all these cities were occupied, and they were guarded by high walls. And amazingly, They all suffered major destructions in the same short period, just as described in the Bible.
When you put those cities side by side, the biblical account and the archaeology match extremely well. I think we have enough destroyed and abandoned cities to say this fits the sequence of events the Bible is describing. There's a high probability that we're looking here at Joshua's conquest.
The whole thing, from the beginning of the sojourn in Egypt, the slavery, Moses and the Exodus, the conquest of the Promised Land, is all there in one nice, neat line, but it's way too early.
Roel Bimson and others suggest that this problem didn't start with the Bible. It began with Egypt. They propose that early scholars developed its dating incorrectly, and that new information requires that the events of Egypt's history be shifted forward on the timeline by centuries.
And all of a sudden, these things that are too early become contemporary with the events in the Old Testament. They sync up again. Everything links together.
I was so excited to hear of this possibility. It would explain why all the evidence has been consistently earlier. But could the history scholars created for Egypt really be off by centuries?
I'm very much against chronological revisionism. Very good, very competent historians have been working for decades and decades on Egyptian chronology and Near Eastern chronology. There's still more work to be done, but I don't see a possibility of moving things centuries.
I'm not into this business at all, and I think that we know enough to say that we may be wrong 10 years here and 10 years there, but there's no way, to change, to shift centuries. I mean, forget it. I think that we are on solid ground, so there's no need to look for, different centuries.
What was I supposed to do now? Hoffmeier and Finkelstein represent mainstream opinion, and I can't simply ignore it. The fact is, the majority of scholars, even believers in the Bible, won't allow the evidence I've seen to be connected to the Exodus. It's just too early. This is the biggest giant of all, standing in the way of solving this problem. But the biblical pattern was so strong that I just couldn't let it go.
Mahoney's researchers uncovered a lead that led him to Oxford University. On St. John Street is the Griffith Institute, one of the greatest storehouses of Egyptological documents in the world. He was here to review the writings of the late Sir Alan Gardner, perhaps the greatest specialist in reading hieroglyphs in the 20th century, and he had a great hand in uncovering what we know today.
I was moved as I looked through his personal notes. In some ways, I was following a path that he had helped to clear. After a lifetime of searching, Gardner wrote something that directly impacted the question I was dealing with.
It must never be forgotten that we are dealing with a civilization thousands of years old, and one of which only tiny remnants have survived. What is proudly advertised as Egyptian history is merely a collection of rags and tatters.
If all we have are rags and tatters, how sure can we be about the dates? Alan Gardner said that what we have is rags and tatters. Is that still true today, or do you think that's changed?
No, I think that basically is true. What's interesting about the source material from ancient Egypt, though, is that those rags and tatters are more numerous and of a more varied kind than almost any other civilization on the face of the earth. You name it, every kind of material imaginable has come down to us. Not complete, but tantalizing rags and tatters. And it's a wonderful thing to have all of this material, but it's also extremely frustrating because it means there's that much more room for argument and doubt.
Kent Weeks made no indication that he'd be in favor of anything as major as shifting Egypt's history by centuries. But the reality is, a shift wouldn't just affect Egypt, because the archaeological dates for Canaan and the surrounding region are all dependent on Egypt's history.
When all is said and done, it's the Egyptian chronology that underpins everything else that's being done throughout the rest of the known world. It's a big responsibility, and it's one of the reasons that people look at it so closely, because in terms of reconstructing ancient history, a lot hinges on the answers.
So if Egypt's historical dates are not that certain and need adjusting, then Canaan's history would also require the same kind of shift, because they're connected.
But a lot of people don't want to do that.
No, because Egyptian chronology has been assumed to be fixed now for a very long period of time. So the whole idea of taking it apart and starting again is anathema to most Egyptologists.
Mm-hmm. Because it would undo a lot of their books, wouldn't it?
It certainly would, yes.
But there's mounting evidence that the current reconstruction of Egyptian history has major problems that have nothing to do with the Bible.
There's a whole host of reasons for being skeptical about the current Egyptian chronology. Some of them to do with Egypt itself, but a lot of them from outside Egypt, which a number of people are beginning to look at.
Other good scholars maintain that you don't need to change Egypt's timeline in order to see evidence for the Exodus. James Hoffmeyer believes textual clues in the Bible point to the Exodus happening at the 1250 BC Ramesses date. Bryant Wood and Charles Ayling believe the Exodus occurred around 1450 BC, using the conventional dates for Egypt and Canaan. They believe a case can be made for Israelites living in Egypt prior to that time, and later Israel appearing as a nation in Canaan. So an exodus of some kind must have taken place.
But the only place that I saw a pattern matching all the steps was in the Middle Kingdom, not the New Kingdom. And if that's not a coincidence, it would require some kind of major change. Either the Exodus happened long before 1450, or the dates for Egypt's timeline are off.
The debate over the dates of ancient history is intensifying, while the conclusions of those who support major adjustments differ in their details. They're all of the same mind that these things are worth investigating, and that chronology is not yet fixed and is not yet final. Researchers like Roland Bimson believe the main problem lies in these lesser-known dark periods of Egypt's past. They think scholars have miscalculated their lengths, causing distortions in the dates for everything before them. The biggest suspect is this very long third dark period, which new information suggests has been overinflated by centuries. If it were reduced, the history of Egypt would need to move forward in time.
For many years, I was intimidated by the giant of Egypt's dating. But what made me take a second look was when I learned that it's been necessary to insert gaps into the histories of all the surrounding civilizations in order to match the dating of Egypt's third dark period. Yet the archaeology of these cultures does not seem to support such gaps. Something was wrong.
What might history look like if the dark periods were adjusted the way that some scholars believe the evidence demands?
What's not changing is the Bible timeline, because that's not affected by it. If you're changing the Egyptian timeline, you're moving it against the Bible timeline. So all of a sudden, things that were not in the right time period between the two are suddenly lining up in a different way. And that's the exciting bit, because that's when we suddenly start to find evidence for the biblical story.
It's startling to think how significant this could be, because chronology, the dates assigned to these events, is the thing being used to convince the world that the Bible is just a fairy tale. But look at the pattern. Evidence matching Joseph and the early Israelites' arrival in Egypt, their tremendous multiplication, their descent into slavery, the judgment and collapse of Egypt, the deliverance and exodus of the Semitic population, and finally in Canaan, evidence matching the conquest of the Promised Land. I know there's a lot of disagreement over the dating, but what strikes me is that if you put all the dates to the side for a moment, what emerges from the archaeology is this pattern that matches the Bible every step of the way. And doesn't that deserve to be taken seriously? But for now, those who hold to established conventions will not allow these connections to be made. I'm not an Egyptologist, I'm a filmmaker. And I'm not endorsing any one dating theory out there. I'm just searching for the truth. Because isn't that what the pursuit of both science and faith should be? A search for truth.
At the end, the audience, the people themselves, they will judge. They will know if you are a scientific man, a logical theory, or you are exaggerating, or you have some story from your own mind.
Are these findings just an exaggeration? Or is looking for the Exodus at the earlier date the key step in bringing the Bible out of the shadows of myth and into the light of true history? People wonder why they haven't heard about this before. But what I found out was that a lot of people don't want to talk about it. Archaeologists, people in the media, no one's willing to actually tell this story. And I had to ask that same question of myself. Was I willing to follow this story to where it really led? But there is something to these ancient stories, and we just felt that, you know what, we just had to let people know what the truth was.